So a very warm good evening to one and all present here today. We are having a live cardiology academic session, an approach to cardiac murmurs in association with IMA Students Network. Today we have eminent speaker Dr. Mithun Kumar from Dr. Cherian's Hospital to discuss and share the latest updates in the cardiac murmurs. Over to you, Dr. Mithun.
Okay, so warm welcome to bring this presentation. So this is just going to be a basic presentations for our graduate students for how to approach to a cardiac disease. So whenever we speak of cardiology, we tend to give more focus to listen to murmurs, to classify murmurs, because that's the thing that's always fascinating, because it's a presenting complaint to the physician, because a patient cannot differentiate a loud S from the palpable P2 or a skewed P2, but some patients may be able to feel a murmur, and they may present that they feel unusual, some sound riches. So sometimes we get patients who present with they feel some murmuring sound. So how to approach these patients will be a basic discussion, and if at all you have any questions that can be answered at the last. So my scheme of presentations is going to be really define murmur, what the mechanism of production, the characteristics of murmur, what is a dynamic auscultation. So then coming to systolic murmurs, diastolic murmurs, and continuous murmurs. So I'll try to keep it short and more of a practice oriented, more of a pathophysiologic discussion rather than just I'm not going to speak what is written in the slide. I'm going to explain the basic concepts behind it, so that these slides are available in the textbooks and available in a number of materials around the world. So you may not follow the slides, but the basic concept of approaching is very important rather than what is given in this. So whenever we speak of murmurs, the one thing that's always comes in the mind is basically it's all common sense. So whenever we are finding anything abnormal in the clinical examination, it's more of a common sense rather than the scientific knowledge. So if you are a shrew and you have more of common sense, then clinical examination is very, very, very easy. You do not get tensed about clinical examination. So we usually teach students that at the time of they are going to start listening to the murmurs, they should have a basic diagnosis of what they are expecting in the chest wall. So my approach is do not go and listen to the murmurs at first itself. Do not put a step or on auscultation and listen to murmur. Murmur has to be the last part in the clinical examination. You have to approach in a systematic way by inspection, looking at the apical impulse, looking at the JVP, looking for any palpable heart sounds. Then you have to come for heart sounds. So by the end of inspection and palpation, you should have a working diagnosis coupled with your history taking. So history taking, examination of JVP, examination of vital examination, examination of apical impulse, examination of heart sounds. So all this should give you a confirmatory diagnosis. Auscultation of murmur is only to confirm what you are going to test. So if you are able to say that this patient has MR from the clinical exam, from the examination of vitals, from the history taking, from the inspection and palpation, then if you put your step, you automatically listen to the pancreatic murmur. From the history, if you are able to diagnose that it is mitral stenosis, then if you are going to ask it, you can automatically take a mid-diastolic murmur. It's not the other way around. You should not go and auscultate mid-diastolic murmur and then come and say that, okay, patient has so much duration of heart pressure, patient has PND episode. It's not the other way around. A proper history taking, a proper vital examination, a proper examination of JVP is very, very, very paramount when compared to the examination of murmurs. So coming to the definition is nothing but murmur is a harsh sound. So whenever if we hear many musical sounds that emit noise or sound when there is a small passage. So for example, flute, you can hear that whenever the musician blows into the flute, there's a small opening by which the sound comes. So the same physiology is the definition of murmurs. So murmur is defined as a relatively prolonged series of auditory vibrations which vary in the intensity, the frequency, the configuration and duration. So whenever you are going to define murmur, all these characters should be defined. So if you by these characters, what we are trying to say is we are going to differentiate a murmur of mitral regurgitation We are going to from a murmur of yes. It's like differentiating by saying how will you examine an elephant but from a lion. So if you're going to tell that the animal you're seeing is elephant, you're going to say that's a four-legged animal. The legs are thick. It has a large trunk. The eyes, it has large ears. So by way of this description, we are differentiating among the four-legged animals. We are differentiating elephant from a lion. So the same thing goes to examination of murmur. So whenever you are going to describe any murmur, it has to be done in a sense that each and every word has some differentiating factor from the rest of it. So if you're going to say that I'm hearing a loud, blowing pansystolic murmur, then it excludes many other diagnoses. So the moment you say pansystolic murmur, it excludes aortic stenosis because aortic stenosis cannot produce a pansystolic murmur. So each and every word in description of murmur is going to say something positively and also say something negative. So it also has a positive predictive value so that you're implying something and it also excludes something. So a murmur description has to be in such a way that it has to be to the point, no unnecessary descriptions, and each and every word is very, very important. So you cannot ignore anything in description of murmur. So why the murmur happens is there are only three basically. Whenever you are hearing murmur, it can occur only due to three things. One is any stenosis. So any stenosis, the proximal chamber has to increase its pressure so that it can push the blood out of the stenosis. So there will be a pressure difference between the two chambers. If there's a stenosis, for example, in mitral stenosis, the stenosed mitral valve, the LA has to increase its pressure so that it can push blood into the LV. So the pressure gradient between LA and LV generates a flow and generates a murmur. The same thing goes for aortic stenosis. In aortic stenosis, the LV has to increase its pressure to push the blood out into the aorta. So there is a pressure gradient between LV and aorta. So whenever there is a stenosed or narrowed segment, there exists a pressure gradient, and that pressure gradient produces murmur. So the same thing applies for increased velocity through a normal channel. So whenever the flow velocity is increased, for example, in anemia, in thyrotoxicosis, or in high cardiac output status, the orifice area can be normal, but the flow velocity can increase, and that increased flow velocity can produce turbulence, and that turbulent flow can produce murmurs. Or the third possibility is any leak, for example, in aortic regurgitation, in ventricular septal defect, there will be a communication between two chambers where there are pressure difference. So the basic concept of producing a murmur is there will be existing a pressure gradient. So only a pressure gradient, most of the circumstances will produce a murmur, or else this increased turbulent flow. So the turbulent flow can be due to increase in fluid density, increase in fluid velocity, decrease in tube diameter, increase in viscosity. So either of these factors can produce turbulence, and we define turbulence by the Reynolds number. So whenever the Reynolds number is more than 2000, we call it as turbulence. So the turbulence is related to being directly proportional to the density and velocity and inversely proportional to the diameter and viscosity. So whenever there's a flow turbulence, it will produce murmur, or whenever there's a pressure gradient, it will produce murmur. So the murmurs are produced by these two scenarios only. One is existence of a pressure gradient or existence of a turbulent flow. So either of these characteristics will be there to produce a murmur. So this is the same thing explained here. So whenever there's a flow velocity or a small orifice diameter or very low kinetic viscosity, it will produce turbulence. And these are some of the mechanisms that are described whenever they say that how murmurs. So these are the physics beyond the murmur generation. So the high, for example, in ventricular septal rupture, there's a high LV pressure and a low RV pressure. So the impact of jet into the RV will produce a surrounding area into vibrations, and those vibrations can be heard as murmur. And the other thing is cavitation. So the impact will produce some cavitation, and that vibrations will be produced. And water shedding is nothing but the high velocity jet will produce some flow eddy currents and eddy currents, and those will produce a murmur. So these are all the physics in generating the murmur sound. So vortex shedding, jet impact, cavitation, eddy current, wake phenomenon, Bernoulli. So these are the basic physical characteristics that exist to produce a murmur. So, but ultimately, two things has to be kept in mind. So whenever you are going to hear a murmur, it proves that either there's a pressure gradient or there is a turbulent flow. So based on these two mechanisms only, the murmur will be generated. So this is the thing I explained previously. Whenever you are going to describe a murmur, it has to be done in this following characteristics. Number one is timing. So whenever we will see one by one later. So I've just enumerated. So the characteristics is timing, the location of the murmur, the duration of the murmur, the intensity of the murmur, the frequency of the murmur, the configuration of murmur, if there is any transmitted characteristics or any dynamic oscillation. So these are the main subheadings by which you describe a murmur so that the examiner understands that the murmur characteristics is due to this pathophysiological mechanism. So in clinical examination, the main thing that we have to focus is what is the pathophysiology behind a particular symptom. So the patient says that he has dyspnea, then you have to find why this patient has dyspnea. For example, in mitral stenosis, dyspnea will be the earliest presentation. In mitral regurgitation, dyspnea will be the late presentation. So we have to differentiate that why in mitral stenosis dyspnea occurs earlier and why in mitral regurgitation dyspnea occurs late. So if you are able to understand the pathophysiology concepts of a particular disease, then approach to history taking will be very, very easy. You should not go on systematically go and say that you have chest pain, you have shortness of breath, whether you have palpitation, whether you have symptoms. It's not like that. The patient will say the history. He will say that I have been having dyspnea for the past 5 years. For the past 6 months, I'm experiencing worsening. Then you have to see why the disease process is silent for past 5 years, and then suddenly it exaggerates in the past 6 months. So what makes the disease process to settle for a downhill course? When you're able to understand those concepts, then history taking and clinical examination will be very, very easy. The same thing goes for application of understanding the murmur. So if you are able to understand that in mitral regurgitation, there is not going to be any isovolumetric contraction time, so that the murmur starts as soon as the S1 occurs, as soon as the mitral valve systole occurs, then the murmur is going to happen. This murmur is going to occur. So there exists a pressure gradient between LV and LA towards the systole. So that's why the murmur of mitral regurgitation is pansystolic. On the other hand, in aortic stenosis, the gradient exists only after the aortic valve opens. So that there will be an isovolumetric contraction time. Only after that, the aortic valve can open. Then only the pressure gradient will exist between LV and aortic. So if you are able to understand the concept between why an MR murmur is pansystolic, why an aortic stenotic murmur is ejection systolic, then we did not memorize that the causes of pansystolic murmur is MR, PR, VSD. The cause of ejection systolic murmur is AS, PS. We did not memorize it. So memorizing clinical examination is never a good thing. You have to understand the pathophysiology, understand the concepts, so that and read, so that you are not going to memorize it, but you are going to understand it. So that's the difference between memorizing 10 causes of mid-diastolic murmur without understanding the pathophysiology, then rather than understanding the concept and saying only 5 causes of MDM. So both are very different. So coming back to the characteristics, these 8 characteristics are very important. One is timing, other is location, duration, intensity, frequency, the configuration of murmur, transmission, and dynamic oscillations. We will see one by one. So by timing, in cardiac cycle, there are only 2 timings. One is systole, the other is diastole. So systole exists between S1 and S2, diastole exists between S2 and S1. So what do you mean by systole? It is the onset of LV ejection. So LV ejection starts when the moment the mitral valve closes. So the closure of mitral valve is first answer. Closure of the AV valves is corresponding to the first one. Can be either tricuspid valve or mitral. So the first answer begins with closure of AV valves. Then it exists until the closure of semilunar. So either closure of pulmonary valves or closure of aortic valves. So the systolic duration is a period of LV ejection. It extends from S1 to S2. The other phase is once the aortic valve closes, then the mitral valve opens, and so the diastolic filling occurs. So the period between S2 and the closure of AV valves is called diastole. So basically in cardiac cycle, there are 2 mechanisms. One is systole and the other is diastole. So the classification is based on whether the murmur is heard during the phase of systole or during the phase of diastole or both the phases. So if the murmur is heard only during systole, it's called a systolic murmur. The murmur is heard only during diastole, it's called diastolic murmur. Or else if the murmur starts at the systole and it engulfs S2 and extends into the part of diastole. It is called as continuous movement. The continuous movement need not be continuously present. So you should not think that a continuous movement should start from S1 and it should continue to S2 and end at S1. It's not like that. A continuous movement means that it engulfs the S2. So the presence or absence of S2 does not disturb this flow murmur. So this continuous murmur will not be disturbed by the presence of S2. So the hemodynamics of the continuous murmur will not be disturbed by the closure of semilunar valves. So that is the only thing that is differentiating a continuous murmur from a pansystolic murmur. So in pansystolic murmur, the murmur hemodynamics will be influenced by the closure of the semilunar valves. So if the closure of the semilunar valves is not disturbing the hemodynamic effect, it engulfs the S2 or it does not bother about S2, it just proceeds beyond S2, then it is called as continuous murmur. So in this point, you have to differentiate between to and fro murmurs and the continuous murmurs. To and fro murmurs is two murmurs. That is a systolic murmur, that's a diastolic murmur, but you can hear a clear S2. So if you are able to hear a S2 and that's a systolic murmur and that's a diastolic murmur, it is not called as continuous murmur. A continuous murmur will engulf the S2. So that point is very, very, very important. So based on timing of murmur, there can be three. It can be either systolic murmur, it can be either diastolic murmur, and it can be a continuous murmur. Then further classifying a systolic and diastolic, we have three phases. One is early phase, mid phase, or PAT. That is the whole part of the systole. Why this category is very, very important? Because as I already said, the early systolic murmur will start from the isovolumetric contraction time. So ejection systolic murmur will start only after the isovolumetric contraction time. So as I already said, in a murmur of aortic stenosis, the pressure gradient exists only after the aortic valve opens. So whenever the period between the closure of the AV valves and opening of the semilunar valves, we call it as isovolumetric contraction time, meaning the LV has to generate enough force to overcome the aortic pressure so that the semilunar valve can open. So for that, this period, there won't be any pressure gradient between LV and aorta. So an aortic stenosis murmur cannot be pansystolic because there will be an isovolumetric contraction. On the other hand, in MR, it does not depend upon between the opening of the semilunar valve. As soon as the AV valve closes, there will be a pressure gradient between the LV and LA. So it does not depend upon the time to open the semilunar valves. So in a mitral regurgitation, the pressure gradient is between the LV and LA. In aortic stenosis, the pressure gradient is between LV and aorta. So that's the difference between these two scenarios. For the pressure gradient to exist between LV and LA, there need not be an isovolumetric contraction. The moment the AV valve closes, the pressure gradient starts so that the murmur goes into the blood goes into the LA. But on the other hand, in aortic stenosis, the semilunar valve has to get open. Then only the pressure gradient will exist between LV and aorta. So what is the major difference between a pansystolic and an ejection systolic is there will be a period of isovolumetric contraction in ejection systolic murmur. The period of isovolumetric contraction time will not be present in pansystolic murmur. So if you're able to hear a murmur as soon as the first starts from, so as soon as the semilunar valve closes, the murmur starts, then we call it as pansystolic murmur. It need not be going up to the S2. The moment the isovolumetric contraction time is engulfed, we call it as pansystolic. On the other hand, if you're able to hear a pass between S1 and the onset of murmur, then it is called as ejection systolic murmur. It is very, very, very important to understand this concept. And the other thing is mid diastolic or late diastolic, and the murmur is generally described based on timing on this. And this is the thing I'm explaining. So you should everyone should read and understand and draw this diagram. So this is called a Lewis diagram or Brugger's diagram, because many of the hemodynamic factors that you are going to listen, they are going to see in their clinical practice is based on these pressures. So it contains the heart sound, it contains the ECG, it contains the LV pressure, the aortic pressure curve, it contains the LV pressure. So as I said, this is AV valve closes is corresponding to the first heart sound, and then the aortic valve opens. So the period between the aortic valve closure and aortic valve closure and aortic valve opening is called as isovolumetric contraction. So this period of isovolumetric contraction will not be present in the pansystolic murmur, so that the murmur starts from the first arson. On the other hand, in ejection systolic murmur, the pressure gradient will start only after the aortic valve opening. So this period there will be pause between the first arson and the onset of murmur. So in ejection systolic murmur, there will be gap between S1 and the onset of murmur. In pansystolic murmur, there won't be any gap. The murmur starts as soon as the first arson occurs. So this is very important. Okay. So coming to the location. So first we have seen the time. So the murmur is seen the systole, the which cause of systole or diastolic or continuous. And coming to the location. By location, we have 4 valves. So that is aortic valve, pulmonary valve, tricuspid valve, and mitral valve. So the anterior most structure is the RV. So RV is the anterior most structure. That is the chamber that is present close to the chest wall is right ventricle and the tricuspid valve. So by means of location, we can describe that 4 main area. One is the apical area, the other is left second intercostal space, the other is basal left fourth intercostal space, the other is right second intercostal space. So these are the 4 important areas. So whenever you are going to auscultate, you have to describe auscultation. So in auscultation, either you can share by location to location, or you can share the events. So whenever you are going to see about the first art sound, it automatically denotes that the first art sounds are better heard in the apex. So you are going to describe the apical area. So whenever you are going to say about second art sound, it automatically means that second art sounds are better heard in the pulmonary area, the left second intercostal space. So you're going to concentrate the area. So either you can go by location to location, or now many are saying that we not bother about the location. Just go and describe the events. So you go and describe the first art sound. You go and describe the second art sound. You go and describe any added sounds. Then you go and describe the murmurs. By describing murmurs, you are going to see, for example, in a case of mitral stenosis, the murmur is going to be more pronounced in the apex. So automatically, you're going to say that this murmur is heard in the apical area. For example, in the case of aortic stenosis, the murmur is more commonly will be heard, better heard in the second right intercostal space. So generally, we do not describe as an old textbook. We don't describe as mitral area separately, then apical area separately, or basal area, or left intercostal space. We describe the event. We describe the first art sound. We describe the second art sound. We describe any added sounds. We describe any added events or clicks. Then you describe the murmurs in the basis of whichever severity is. For example, it's a combined lesion, then whichever the severe lesion, you describe the murmur of the severe lesion first, and then come to the murmur of the second lesion. So basically, in location, so in apex, the murmur of mitral stenosis is better heard in the apex. In left costal margin, the murmur of tricuspid stenosis is better heard. In second left intercostal space, the murmur of pulmonary stenosis is heard. In infraclavicular region, the murmur of patent rectus arteries is better heard. So each and every area corresponding to the abnormal structures there, the murmur will be transmitted to those locations. The third important point, which will help to understand the severity of the lesion, is the duration or length of the murmur. So whenever you are going to describe any murmur, length of the murmur is very, very important. So why this length of the murmur is very important? Because it is going to indirectly tell us the presence of a persistent pressure gradient. So whenever you are going to say that a mid-diastolic murmur of a mitral stenosis extends into the late diastole, it means that the pressure gradient presence not only in the mid-diastole, it also extends into the later part of the diastole. So it means that there is a persisting pressure gradient between the LA and LV, so that the stenosis is very, very severe. The same thing in aortic regurgitation murmur, we are going to say that the duration of murmur is long, then it means that there is a persistent pressure gradient between aorta and LV, so that the amount of leakage in blood is more. So indirectly, by means of length of the murmur, you are indirectly estimating the presence of pressure gradient, that is duration of pressure gradient, which in many cases will help to classify the severity of the lesion. For example, in aortic stenosis, the murmur extends for a long duration. It means that the severity is more, because the stenosis is more, so that it takes more time to empty the blood, and the pressure gradient exists for a long time. So this duration and length of the murmur is very, very important, because it's going to indirectly tell us about the severity of the lesion. So as I already said, it depends on the duration of events such as pressure gradient between the two sides or any cardiac chamber, and it indirectly reflects a severe lesion. I mean, not only stenotic lesion. In the case of EAR, it can be in either regurgitation lesion also. It indirectly helps to assess the severity of lesion. So coming to the intensity of grading, this is very important because most innocent murmur, or we call that physiological murmur, will not be heard loud more than grade 3. So if you are saying that any murmur is more than any systolic murmur beyond grade 3, it means that there is something pathological. So physiological murmur exists, and it may be a maximum, it can be grade 2. It can never be a beyond grade 3. So whenever you are going to start that the murmur grade is 3/6, it means that it is not physiological, it is pathological. So how to classify? Grade 1 is faint murmur, grade 2 is easily audible but not that much loud. Grade 3 is easily audible loud murmur but without thrill. Grade 4 is with thrill. So whenever you are going to see a murmur and you can feel the presence of thrill, and it automatically comes into grade 4. And grade 5 is murmur audible only with the step present close to the chest wall. And grade 6, murmur audible even if you lift the step lightly from the chest wall. So if the murmur is audible even if you are not pressing the step close to the chest wall, then it's classed as grade 6. So any murmur beyond grade 3, then it's of a clinical significance. So coming to pitch. So what do you mean by pitch? So we know any sound will have two main characteristics. One is the frequency. So what is sound wave? Basically, sounds are nothing but oscillation of any sound, oscillation of waves. So oscillation of waves will produce a particular sound reflective energy, which when the presence is in the range of 20 to 20,000 hertz, that is audible. So anything beyond 20,000 hertz that is not audible to human ear, we call it as ultrasound waves. So whenever the vibrations are between 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz only, it is audible to the human ear. So basically, sound waves are nothing but vibrations and oscillations. So it has two properties. One is the frequency. So how frequently it is oscillation, whether it's low frequency or high frequency. And frequency is inversely proportional to the wavelength. For example, if the frequency is high, then the wavelength will be small. If the frequency is slow, then the wavelength will be large. So wavelength and frequency are inversely proportional. So what is the concept of pitch is? Pitch is nothing but the musical quality to the sound. So for example, a female voice which is very pure, which is very tone, is most to be a high pitch. So whenever we say that any murmur is high pitch, then it means that it is more of a musical. The tone is smooth, it is of more of a musical. And whenever we say of pitch, a male voice has a low pitch because our voice are harsh. So whenever you say that the murmur is low pitch, then it means that the frequency is low and it's more of a rumbling noise. It's as if a bullock cart is a bullock cart is traveling in the road. So a low pitched murmur will be more like a male voice. It will be a rough voice. A high pitched murmur will be more like a musical note. It will be like a blowing, soft musical note. So the frequency will be monotonous. Or in a low pitched murmur, so low pitch equals to low frequency, high pitch equals to high frequency. So in a low pitch murmur, it will be a rough, rumbling quality. The high pitched murmur will be a musical quality, and a medium pitch murmur will be a mix of these two. So the classical example for low pitched murmur is MDM of mitral stenosis. A classical example of high pitched murmur is murmur of MR and AR. A classical example of medium pitched murmur is AS. So whenever you are going to start that a low pitched, rough, rumbling murmur, then it automatically sets the tone that you are going to describe a mitral stenosis event. If you start with a soft, blowing murmur, is transystolic murmur, then you are going to describe the EMR. So this is the thing that I already said. Each and every word description of murmur will help to include a possibility and exclude a possibility. So our description of murmur should be to the point. It should not be vague, and you should not omit anything. So omission is also will be taken seriously, and unnecessary commission also will be taken seriously. It should be correct and to the point. So this is the thing I already explained. So whenever there's a murmur, there's going to be existing of a pressure gradient. So in mitral regurgitation, the pressure gradient is between the LV and the LV. In aortic stenosis, the pressure gradient is between the LV and the aorta. In ventricular septal defect, the pressure gradient is going to be between the LV and the RV. In pulmonary stenosis, it is between the RV and pulmonary artery. In aortic regurgitation, it's going to be between the aorta and LV at the time of diastole. It's not systole, it's at the time of diastole. That's why the aortic diastolic pressure is 80, the LV diastolic pressure is 10. And in tricuspid stenosis, it's between the RA and RV. And in mitral stenosis, it's between the LA and LV. So whenever you are going to auscultate any murmur, it indirectly implies that there exists a pressure gradient which may be normal or abnormal. Then coming to configuration. So by configuration, we mean that how the murmur characteristic exists in the when we are feeling, whether it's increasing or decreasing, whether it's uniformly same, whether it's decreasing and then increasing. So we are just describing how we are hearing the murmur, whether the murmur is uniformly heard throughout or whether it is changing its intensity in different phases of cardiac cycle. So in configuration, we have this plateau that is holosystolic. It's of similar quality throughout the period of murmur, or it can be crescendo, decrescendo. It increases and then it decreases, or it can be a simple decrescendo. It just decreases, or it can be a diastolic decrescendo, or it can be continuous peaking around the second arch. So based on configuration, you can see that how the hemodynamics varies depending upon the various alteration in the cardiac cycle. And then coming to transmission of murmur. So sometimes murmur will be heard in one point, and the same murmur can be conducted or transmitted to some other points. So conduction, we mean that it's of the same direct anatomical conductivity. For example, we heard a murmur of aortic stenosis, it can be conducted to the carotid. We heard a murmur of mitral regurgitation, it can be conducted to the axilla because it's in the close anatomical proximity, the same continuous anatomical proximity. So conduction of murmur means the murmur is conducted to the same anatomical plane. Other thing is a transmission of murmur. Transmission of murmur is the murmur, MR murmur will be transferred to the apex and aortic stenosis murmur to the base and cerebrum. So whether you should share that the murmur you are hearing in two different places are the murmurs of same pathophysiology or of different pathophysiology. That very important point that is most often helpful in our clinical examination, but often neglected point. That is only we feel that dynamic auscultation is only a theory. It is not going to help in practical ways. It is very, 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 very bad. Even when I was an undergraduate or when I was in MD medicine, I felt that dynamic auscultation is more of a theoretical value rather than a practical value. But the moment I started studying for my DM cardiology exam, I understood the importance of dynamic auscultation because this is the one thing that is going to pinpoint or dynamic auscultation will never be wrong. So you can inadvertently correct your diagnosis that by way of dynamic auscultation. You can misinterpret ejection system murmur of AS and MR, but the moment you put the patient on hand grip, then you can easily differentiate the AS murmur from an MR murmur. So dynamic auscultation is very, very important, and it's a thing that will not fail. So even if our ears may fail, but once you do a proper dynamic auscultation, then there is you will be master of everything. So dynamic auscultation is nothing but by way of some maneuvering, we are altering the pathophysiology of the blood flow so that some murmur may increase in intensity, some murmur may decrease in intensity. So depending upon what the pathophysiology you are alterating and depending upon the clinical condition, you can exclude some diagnosis and include some diagnosis. So in that way, dynamic auscultation is it's a friend rather than a foe. So if you're able to read properly about dynamic auscultation and apply in day-to-day practice, then you're going to be a master of cardiology because nothing is so more satisfying than doing a dynamic auscultation and pinpointing a diagnosis because it will be very, very, very interesting to do. And once you're able to differentiate some murmurs, you're able to, for example, if a patient put on an HOCM patient, we only dynamically auscultated by standing and sitting. The moment the patient stands, the murmur intensity will fall, and the moment the patient squats, the intensity will be more. So that this difference will be etched in our mind rather than simple auscultation. Dynamic auscultation, the thrill it brings, the joy it brings is uncomparable when we are doing a simple auscultation. So each and everyone should do this dynamic auscultation so that you enjoy listening to the sounds, and you understand the pathophysiology behind what are the maneuver you are going to produce, and what are the changes that maneuver is going to give in the corresponding clinical situation. So dynamic auscultation is very, very important. So what are the maneuvers that we have that can alter the that can alter the blood flowing condition is basically we can alter these four. One is respiratory, the other is positional change, the third is physical maneuvers, and pharmacological generally we don't do in our clinical examination. So but these three important is very, very important. So we can alter the respiratory cycle so that the amount of blood entering into the RV or the amount of blood entering into the LV can be altered so that it can produce some changes in the pathophysiology, or you can alter the position, or you can alter the physical maneuvers. So coming to respiration, so why respiration is very important? Because when you are going to inspire, what happens? The intrathoracic pressure is going to decrease so that there will be a negative pressure. So the blood will be sucked in. So whenever you are taking a deep inspiration, the blood will be sucked into the right chamber of the heart. So there will be increased venous return to the right side of the heart, and the pulmonary vascular system is going to dilate in response to the increased venous return. So this causes increased stroke volume on the right side. So by way of deep inspiration, what we are achieving is we are achieving increased blood flow to the right side of the heart. So any murmurs that is coming from that is originating from the right side of the heart is going to increase in intensity. So in deep inspiration, right side of murmurs will increase in intensity. The same thing happens in expiration. So if we are going to expire, then the pulmonary venous flow is going to increase. So the left side of the heart is going to get more blood. So all right-sided events will increase in inspiration, all left-sided events will increase in expiration. And the one change that we have to see is MR. So in mitral regurgitation, as the pressure gradient is going to exist irrespective of the amount of blood it's receiving, irrespective of the preload, the pressure gradient between LV and LA will not be altered. So the MR murmur will not be changed with respiration, will not be changed with cycle duration. So a PVC or an expiration will not produce any change in MR. On the other hand, the aortic stenosis murmur, it will be softened on inspiration. The intensity will be reduced on inspiration, and it will be better heard in expiration. So that's why in description, the phase of the respiratory cycle where you better hear the murmur is very, very important. So if you are going to describe any left-sided murmur, you have to say that it is better heard in the expiration. In case of right-sided murmur, it always says that the murmur is better heard in inspiration. The only exception is MR, because the preload is not determining the pathophysiology of MR. So MR murmur is not depending upon the preload, it is depending upon the afterload. So any change in afterload is going to produce change in the duration or intensity of the murmur. But any change in the preload, the MR murmur will not change. So, for example, a premature ventricular contraction or any positional change or any respiratory change, all things will alter only the preload. These things will not alter the afterload. So anything that changes the preload will not interfere with the pathophysiology MR. Only those things that change the afterload. For example, valsalva maneuver or isometric handgrip, those things will increase the afterload so that preferentially the blood will enter into the LA rather than into the aorta. So any increase in afterload will increase the MR murmur, but any change in the preload is not going to alter the MR. Then, as I already said, all right-sided events is going to increase intensity with deep inspiration. The murmur of tricuspid stenosis, the murmur of tricuspid regurgitation, the murmur of pulmonary regurgitation, pulmonary stenosis, every right-sided event will increase in inspiration, and all left-sided events will increase in expiration. The other exception to this is RV failure and PST, because the RV cannot increase its stroke volume when it's dysfunctional. So when any condition is associated with the RV failure and PST, then it cannot accommodate the excess blood. So there won't be any increase in the murmur. So whenever you are saying that mitral stenosis with RV dysfunction, then there won't be any increase in the tricuspid regurgitation murmur with inspiration. But this exception should be noted. The other easier thing that can be, you can alter the pathophysiology is the postural changes. So by postural change, we mean that you can auscultate the patient by sitting and by standing. So what happens in standing, when the patient stands from sitting or lying position, then the blood will pool into the lower limb. So the amount of blood going, the systemic venous rhythm is going to get decreased. So there will be decreased stroke volume, there will be decreased arterial pressure, the heart size will get decreased, and these things will reflexly increase the heart rate. So all these changes in the cardiac cycle is going to behave differently in some pathophysiology. So simply you can say that all murmurs will decrease when the patient stands, except the murmur of HOCM, because the murmur of HOCM, whenever it's a dynamic oscillation. So whenever there's a decrease in preload or there's an increase in afterload, this murmur of ESM is going to become louder and longer. And in case of mitral valve collapse, the click occurs earlier, the murmur becomes longer. So any condition that's going to decrease the LV size. The mitral valve collapse is basically a size mismatch. So whenever the volume of LV is going to decrease, then the prolapse is going to be pronounced much earlier. So whenever the volume is more, the prolapse will become much late. So any condition that increases the preload, the click becomes later. Any condition that decreases the preload, the click becomes earlier. So whenever the click comes earlier, the murmur duration is going to be longer. So whenever the clicks occurs later, the murmur duration is going to be shorter. And in squatting, what happens as the patient squat? It is the opposite of standing. So standing, there will be decreased venous rhythm. In squatting, there will be increased venous. So increased venous rhythm and cardiac output, it's going to augment all the right side of murmur. And this you can refer the textbook, but you have to understand the basic pathophysiology. So each and every condition you have to assess independently. So you should not memorize this sentence. So you should not memorize that squatting increases venous rhythm and it augments all the right side murmur. It should not be right there. It should be what happens in aortic stenosis. So aortic stenosis, the amount of blood into the LV is going to increase. So as the amount of blood from the LV is going to increase, then the amount of blood shunted across aortic wall is going to increase, so that the murmur duration is going to increase. So each and everything has to be assessed independently so that you understand the pathophysiology behind the duration of murmur. You should not simply memorize that increased venous rhythm and cardiac output will increase all these murmurs. It should not be like that. You have to understand what happens to this particular condition that makes the murmur to increase in intensity. And the left lateral position, these position changes has to be noted. Sitting and leaning forward will bring the base of the heart so that murmur of aortic stenosis and aortic regurgitation will be better heard. And valvular manual is a separate entity in itself, and it requires a lot of understanding to be done. And the only thing I will stress is there are 4 phases of Valsalva, and whenever we say that we are going to listen a murmur of Valsalva, it's always in the strain phase. So whenever you are going to say that I'm going to hear this Valsalva murmur, it automatically implies this phase 2. So what happens in Valsalva in phase 2 is there will be you are going to force the exhale against a closed glottis. So whenever you are going to force the exhale, it produces an increase in the thoracic pressure, so that the venous rhythm is going to decrease first to the right, and after a few cardiac cycles, the venous rhythm is going to decrease. The left is also decreased. So ultimately, the BP falls, and by reflex mechanism, there is going to be tachycardia. So this phase 2 or strain phase of Valsalva is very, very important, and it's in such a way it's similar to the standing manual. So what happens in standing? There will be decreased venous rhythm. So blood flow to the right side will be stopped, and all the murmurs will reduce in intensity. So the similar thing happens in the phase of Valsalva. So all murmurs of similar to standing, all murmurs will decrease in intensity in phase 2 of Valsalva, except HOCM and MVP. So Valsalva strain phase is somewhat similar to standing. For easy understanding, I'm saying, and this is very important. In strain phase of Valsalva, the BP is going to decrease and the heart rate is going to increase. In the release phase or the reflex phase, the opposite occurs. The BP is going to increase, and then the reflex bradycardia is going to happen. So Valsalva is a separate entity, and I'm not going to much detail about Valsalva, but you just remember that phase 2 of Valsalva is very, very important. In phase 2, there is a decrease in venous rhythm, and so that the BP or the stroke volume decreases, and then there is a reflex tachycardia. As I already said, in phase 2, it is similar to standing. So there will be decrease in all the murmurs. Systolic murmur of AAS, MR will decrease. Diastolic murmur of AAR, MS will decrease, except these two. So this will cause a reduction in LV volume, so that the HOCM murmur is going to increase, the degree of MV product is increased. So standing and phase 2 of Valsalva, you can remember the same thing is going to happen. Because what is the basic pathophysiology? Decreased systemic venous rate. So you need not worry about phase 4, but just read and understand about phase 4. What is the overshoot? And the other important things which you can apply in the day-to-day practice is isometric exercise. So what do you mean by isometric exercise is you are going to basically increase the systemic venous resistance. So whenever you are going to increase the systemic venous resistance, it is going to increase the afterload. So but previously we said that condition altering the preload. That is a systemic venous return. In isometric exercise, we are altering the afterload. We are altering the afterload. The amount of pressure that the LV has to eject is called as afterload. So whenever you're going to alter the afterload, it produces some mechanism. For example, in differentiating of murmur of AS and MR, this afterload is very, very important. Why it's important? In MR, the afterload increases, the LV has two ways to empty the blood. It has an iota, it has an LV. So whenever you're going to increase the afterload, the LV is not going to strain itself to eject into the aorta. So it will decongest into the LV. So whenever the afterload is getting increased, the amount of blood shunted across the mitral valve into the LV will be more. So the murmur of mitral regurgitation will be increased, or the intensity will be increased in any afterload increasing condition. The opposite occurs in aortic stenosis. What happens in aortic stenosis? If the afterload the afterload is increased, the amount of the force it generates to increase itself is going to be more, so that the murmur intensity will be more. So any afterload increase will increase the murmur of MR. So this afterload can be done safely in every patient. You can ask the patients to hold the hand, or you can ask the patient to pressure a BP cup and inflate into a certain degree, so that the patient increases the systemic venous resistance. So by increasing the afterload, by doing the isometric exercise, what we are basically increasing is we are increasing the systemic vascular resistance, and this is going to increase the arterial pressure, the LV feeling pressure, the LV size. So as already said, the systolic murmur of AS will be reduced, and the other murmur, whichever the afterload, for example, in DST, the LV has two chambers. It can either empty itself into the aorta, or it can empty itself into the RV. So any condition that is going to increase the aortic pressure, then the blood is going to preferably shunted into the RV, so that the murmur of ESG is going to increase. The same thing occurs in AR. So already the diastolic pressure is going to be increased. If you further is going to increase the diastolic pressure by increasing systemic venous resistance, then the gradient is going to go, so that the AR. So the only condition that reduces by isometric exercise is AS and HOCM. In all other conditions, it's going to be increased. So this isometric exercise is very important, because all LVOT obstruction is going to decrease in intensity. So the murmur of AS will also be reduced. The murmur of HOCM will also be reduced. So this is very, very important. So in all other conditions, the dynamic auscultation between AS and HOCM will be different. But only thing in isometric exercise, since it's a LV outflow-led obstruction. AS is a fixed LV outflow-led obstruction. HOCM is a dynamic LV outflow-led obstruction. So that any increase in afterload is going to reduce the intensity of LV outflow-led obstruction, either fixed or dynamic. And this is the thing I already said. Post PVC, what happens? The preload is going to increase, and the force of contraction is going to increase. So any increase in preload, any increase in force of contraction will alter the dynamics of murmur, and that has to be understood. And the AS murmur and any ejection murmur, whenever the force of contraction is increased, then the murmur intensity will be increased, and HOCM, the opposite occurs. And amyl nitrate is the opposite of isometric hand grip. So isometric hand exercise is going to produce vasoconstriction, is going to produce increase in systemic venous resistance. Amyl nitrate is the opposite of isometric hand grip, because it's going to produce vasodilation. So whichever murmur you feel that in isometric hand grip is going to increase, by amyl nitrate inhalation, you can produce the opposite. So already it's been for 50 minutes, I think. So generally, we just rush up on these slides. So as I said, whenever you are going to study about the murmurs, it's just a simple pathophysiological understanding. So if you are able to understand the pathophysiology behind a given lesion, then describing the murmur or understand the characteristics of murmur is going to be very, very easy. So as I already said, early systolic murmur, it means that the murmur starts with S1. It can occur in MR and TR. So, and if the severity of the lesion is more, the MR severity is going to more, then it's going to be pansystolic murmur. So the pansystolic murmur occurs in chronic MR and chronic TR. So the condition that produces early systolic murmur, if the severity is more, then it's going to produce pansystolic murmur. So these are the only conditions that can produce pansystolic or early systolic. That is MR, TR, and VSD. Only so if you, the moment you say early systolic murmur or the moment you say pansystolic murmur, there is only three conditions. It can be either mitral regurgitation, it can be either tricuspid regurgitation, or it can be either VSD. Because in all these three conditions, it does not depend upon the open of semilunar valves. As soon as the first heart sound occurs, there is there will be a pressure gradient so that the blood will start going into the cortical channel. So MR, TR, and VSD will produce pansystolic, and if the lesion severity is less, it will produce early systolic. Then coming into late systolic, so late systolic, it's otherwise called as ejection systolic. So ejection systolic, we mean that there is a gap between the first heart sound and the onset of murmur, and any ejection murmur, that is aortic stenosis, pulmonary stenosis, or HOCM, or due to mitral regurgitation. So mitral regurgitation, it can occur in a number of etiological conditions. It can occur due to primary MR or secondary MR. So whenever the MR is going to secondary due to papillary dysfunction or due to mitral collapse, it can be either a mid-systolic or late systolic one. And this is already said. We are not going into the basics of this. So each and everything regarding to the exercise examination, you have to differentiate. So coming to diastolic murmurs. So coming to diastolic murmur, in diastolic murmur also, it is very, very important. So early diastolic murmur is going to produce by either aortic regurgitation or pulmonary regurgitation, and mid diastolic murmur is going to produce by the AV valve obstruction, either mitral stenosis or tricuspid stenosis, and a whole diastolic murmur will be produced by aortic regurgitation or pulmonary regurgitation. So whenever you are going to understand the pathophysiology, then describing the cyclic event or characteristics of murmur will be very, very easy. And sometimes mid-diastolic murmur can also be flow. So whenever there's increased flow across the AV valve or any obstruction of the AV valve, then it's going to produce a flow murmur. So in MR or VSD, the amount of blood that is going across the AV valve is more, so that it produces a flow murmur. So in the condition of severe MR, there will be a pansystolic murmur, and also there will be associated mid-diastolic murmur, but that mid-diastolic murmur is not due to mitral stenosis, it is due to increased flow across the mitral. So any hyperkinetic states or any right-sided increased flow murmur like AST is going to produce a flow murmur. So this finer things you can read in your textbooks. I'm not going into the specific of this. With just a few continuous murmur we'll see, and then we'll wind up this session. So as I already said, the continuous murmur will begin in systole, will continue without interruption to the timing of S2, and it need not extend throughout the period disturbed. It has to just engulf the S2 and spill over into the diastole. The continuous murmur, the basic difference is it starts in the system, it engulfs the S2, and then it spills over into a part of diastole. So this has to be differentiated from the to and fro murmurs of other conditions. In to and fro murmurs, it's two separate murmurs. It is a pansystolic murmur of VSC with a diastolic murmur of AA. There will be a separate S2 between this. Similarly, in AS and AR, there will be a systolic murmur, there will be diastolic murmur, but there will be a distinct S2. Similarly, in MS, there will be diastolic murmur, there will be systolic murmur, there will be a distinct S2. So, presence or absence of S2 will determine whether the murmur is to and fro murmur or continuous murmur. So, continuous murmur clinically, it can be any rapid blood flow or localized arterial obstruction or a continuous shunt between high to low pressure. So a loop back syndrome or a ruptured sinus or valsalva, any bronchial collaterals leading a AP window, or any branch stenosis of major arteries, or any increased blood flow through a venous stem will produce a continuous. So I think we can conclude this session because it's been already 1 hour. So understanding murmur is very, very easy. So you will not memorize whatever person here. Understand the concepts, understand the pathophysiology, so that approaching a murmur will be very, very easy. So I conclude my talk in this. Thanks for your patient listening. And if at all you have any questions, you can take the questions. Any questions?
Doctor, I don't think we have received any question right now. Can we wait for 1 minute in case if someone is trying to type the question or something? So attendees, if you have any doubts, you can put up your question in Q&A box or even chat box. Thank you, Doctor. Indeed, it was a detailed presentation, how it is really joining us today in all aspects of heart murmurs. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the wonderful listening. And,